floodplain and the water and all that. It's kind of been pushed to the edge and the side. There could be potential to explore reintroducing greenery in a way that's intriguing as part of the overall experience. There's certainly enough land area. And I would say that your strategy and what we've laid out, I think you should not just look at the mall property. I think you should look at the neighborhood in terms of the strategy. Because with what happens to the mall and reinvestment, and as that goes well, it's going to create value and opportunity for all the land around it. So we ought to have a basic sense of what could happen around the mall too, so that even the property owners see some vision. It's no different than comprehensive planning, but it's at a micro scale. Okay, so so with all that said, it's great to look at a price, an assessed value at on a price per square foot basis, but it's still a $40 million asset. I mean, that's a huge number, and to expect someone to come in and even buy the $40 million asset and then come in with, probably $600-800 million investment, and have all that happen in one big fell swoop, probably not going to happen. Probably what will happen is it happens incrementally, like you saw in the last presentation. So what becomes very important is what portions of the building remain. Does all the building remain? Does all of it go away? And answering that question is all about programming, and once again, basis, and then the desire, frankly, of your implementing bodies, your agents, the owners that are also developers and operators. But you have anchors in place. This is a good thing. Dillard's is arguably I know that things are in transition, but regardless of where they are and where they have been in the store, they are one of the more progressive owners in the mall arena, that exists today. And then some of the new things that are in place are interesting. I will be hopefully educating myself more about those as we progress. Okay, but it does have fragmented ownership, as you heard before, and we need to understand the encumbrances that the REA brings. As I mentioned, that's task number one. It is disconnected. This really doesn't have a community. It's a drive-by place, and its community is a commercial community, and that's frankly, part of the problem. It doesn't have a nighttime community base that gives it a sense of identity. I think it can. That's not hard to do. That's residential programming. You certainly have land for that. I mean, there is some apartments that are around there, but right now, I mean, I wouldn't want to live in one of those places. It feels very anonymous. It's probably a price point decision, not a location and community decision, I'm guessing. It's hard to get to.
Walkable.
It's not walkable.
Yeah, that ring road makes it
real
huge
tough.
Parking lots, yeah.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how the subsurface infrastructure is laid out, and whether or not some of that can easily change. Because if it can, the ring road is it's concrete on ground. It can change. So that's part of the opportunity. Okay, so let's talk about programming. So we did a quick trade area analysis. We looked at a 5, 10, and 15-minute drive time to this area. And then we broke it down into 3 primary uses: that's retail, restaurant, employment, kind of workplace uses, and then residential types, for sale and for lease, because that is the palette, if you will. And specifically, we looked at what the growth, what the forecasted growth for that trade area is over the next 10 years. You can look at it 20 years like Jason has done, with Catalyst Commercial. I like looking at a 10-year time frame, because anything past 10 year, I mean, we really have a crystal ball. 10 years ago, we barely had an Apple, we barely had an iPhone. So things really changed a lot in that time period. So, also 10 years is a decent investment horizon. Anything beyond that goes outside of the norm of what people are looking for a return. It's usually 5 years. So that's another as we look at a 10-year format. There's no way you're going to see all this. But on the retail restaurant analysis, we looked at within that trade area where dollars are being spent. So if someone drives outside of that trade area and buys something, whether it's a food in a restaurant or shoes in a store, those are dollars that could have been captured within the trade area. It's called leakage. This readily available data through Esri, we pulled this up, we converted that into square footage, We haven't done a supply analysis, but we have discounted it back. And the basic, the summary conclusion of that is that the market is overbuilt for traditional retail in just about all categories. Makes sense. North Texas, it has been and probably will be the most over-retailed market in the country. So it makes sense that it's already been done. Now, with that said, if there may be a lightning strike use that comes in, who knows, meaning something that goes beyond the market. But there's certainly room, even though it may not be measurable today, to introduce a new restaurant. There's certainly room with a new development type that focuses on some restaurants and some kind of specialty retail, but just not a lot. It's not the driver. And it probably would look like this. It probably would be smaller focused, probably be restaurant focused, and be a part of a blend of other uses. Not trying to recreate Old Town, but trying to create something that it is its own district. We're big believers in what's called a polycentric model for a city, where you have different centers of activity, not just a downtown. And each one of those centers of activity have employment, they have services like retail and restaurants, they have housing, and they're nodes. That's a healthy city generally. Hopefully those nodes are connected by your infrastructure, which in this case, you totally are. So that's positive. On the office side, there's a fair amount of opportunity. We have a lot of, with all of our population that's coming to North Texas and specifically forecasted for this trade area, there's employment that comes with that. So we look at the categories of employment that reflect white collar, basically office space. It's not something you're really working out on a construction site, but you're going to work within a building. And we look at those categories, and after discounting it based on the location and looking at the supply a bit, there's 500 to 1 million square feet of use that should be able to happen with the right kind of plan that is employment based over 10 years. But it probably isn't a big office park. There's not a lot of that going on.
Talk to me about the previous slide, the reductions due to COVID.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Okay. So, so a couple things on that. So COVID is intriguing right now. What it has done is it's opened up our eyes to technology and what has gone on. How many meetings before COVID did you all have on Zoom? I had one or two, and it was usually with academic institutions. And I was like, well, what is this? First of all, why is it called Zoom? That's weird. How do I download it? I mean, it was just very cumbersome. And I got on, and I just thought, well, this will never work. Well, now the majority of all of conversations are probably happening that way. And it's fantastic because you don't have to fly somewhere for a 30-minute meeting. You can just have it. It may not be personable. Deals aren't getting struck that way, but business is transacting. So while that's happening, especially in the professional services category, where there's people working on computers, or architects, or engineers, et cetera, they have learned that you can work remotely from home. You don't have to be in the core office. So does that mean that office space is going to go away? It absolutely doesn't mean that. But does it mean that employers are becoming more flexible? Absolutely. Everyone I know that's coming back to work, they don't have to be there 5 days a week anymore. They have to be there maybe 3 days, 2 days, sometimes 1 day. There are some companies you just don't have to come back to work, but occasionally you have group get-togethers. So what that means is traditional measuring of demand for employment space is going to go down. We're not going to be having as much office space built per capita than we used to because of this phenomenon. We're evolving, through technology, we're evolving. And the places, if you look at the big employers, there's still an ego play. People they're trying to, make a claim about their brand, and they want to be in the coolest building. That's why you still see office towers that are being proposed. You look at what Goldman's doing in Uptown. I mean, they are paying over $60 a foot. Okay, those are big rates in our market. And they're coming in because that's kind of a big ego play. But it's also, they're staking their claim in this market. They're coming in from New York. There's a big kind of brand discussion that's going on. So the Class A office space is still there. It's a smaller market, but it's still there. But if you're in Class B and C, they are getting killed right now because AI is replacing many of those jobs. repetitive jobs. AI is starting to take that over. And I think over the next 10, 20 years, we are really going to see a lot of that. So the good news for at least what we're talking about here is you have a Class A location in terms of regional infrastructure. You have a Class A location. You're close to the airport, highly visible. What's on the ground isn't necessarily Class A, but the location is great. So then it comes down to vision, and that's something you all can control. So I feel optimistic about your position here. The other thing I will say is that if you think about a typical retail center, it doesn't matter if it's a mall or if it's a strip center. It gets built, it has its early set of tenants, and then over time it starts cycling down in its tenant group. And when I say cycle down, meaning tenants that can pay money, and then the amount that they can pay goes down proportionally. So you start having kind of second-tier tenants that come in. What always happens when an anchor is a church follows, comes in and fills in that space. Now that's horrible for the city. There's not taxes being paid, you know, all of that, and there's not really life. It makes the place just look wrong. Well, unfortunately, with malls, it's a huge building for a type of retail that almost doesn't exist anymore. It's too much built space. So you see, as you'll see in a moment, some people are saying, hey, we have a great idea. We're going to make it a data center. It's going to be fantastic. Okay. It's a dead hole in the city. There's nothing going on. There's no activity. It's not taking advantage of arguably one of the better locations, probably because it was a mall that exists in the city. So it becomes an albatross. And I mean, that's an option maybe, but I'm not sure I would be recommending that. So we think that there is a fair amount of opportunity for workforce, employment-based land use as part of a mix. Residential, obviously, that's, first of all, it's the biggest land use component of any city, most cities. Certainly here we have huge growth. That growth has got to land and live somewhere. And this is an infill location. Absolutely, there's opportunity for residential. Now, I do think, even though the basis is relatively low, that is high for single family. This isn't going to be a single family development. I don't think the city wants that. It's not taking advantage of the location and the billions of dollars of investment that have gone in previously. But there is potential. We think there's upwards of a couple thousand units of all different types of residential, for sale, for lease, seniors, et cetera. We think there's good potential for that. These numbers are conservative. It could easily be double that. The way we like to measure things also is we look at, you have to look at qualifying incomes, either for sale or for lease, because someone showed a graph earlier which makes a lot of sense, that you look at the, the cost of housing keeps going up. The cost of housing is going up because the cost to build that housing is going up. But if our employment wages are going up at a lesser rate, then, the price of housing continues to rise, so you only have one option. You're going to keep your car longer, you're going to wear your clothes longer, you're going to make decisions like that to be able to afford the higher price in housing. So that's when there's discussions about density, that comes in, because, you can bring the cost down by having more of it. Density in many communities sounds like a four-letter word. There's a huge difference between density and urbanity and urbanism and the positivity that can come from that in terms of the experiences. If you came in and said, we're going to carve out an area of 10 acres, I saw some of the plans before, nothing against them, but we would do something differently for some of those sites. But you carve an area out and just pack in a bunch of density, that's the wrong approach. But if you allow density of housing of all different types to come in and be populated by restaurants and then have some employment near it, there's some cool open space components. Maybe there's a portion of the building or buildings that are maintained for some kind of use that we'll need to think through. That starts getting more exciting to me, especially with a brand that says this is the new X district, whatever that name is, that resonates in the market. And there's probably some cool signage and graphics and murals and all those things that come with exciting urbanism. So there's probably a whole range of different types of housing that would be able to make sense on this site in some manner, is my point. But I would not expect this to be a corporate office park. I wouldn't expect that. It could happen. I'm not saying it couldn't. It could be that Apple decides to move to Dallas for some reason and they want to build a 2 million square foot, hub facilities. But that's called a lightning strike, and you can't plan for that. So you can have the best plan in the world, start going on it, but then suddenly if someone comes in and knocks on your door, you may accept that knock and change your plans and move forward, but highly unlikely. So if you consolidate that, office residential with some spice. That's clearly what the potential is if you're just measuring growth. Now, those are market uses. There are other uses too. There's kind of, entertainment is a commercial use, but there are some interesting things that are evolving within that sphere right now. And, as we come out of COVID, unfortunately, it seems like our cinema industry is about to die. That's very sad to me. I love going to the movies. Does that mean the demand to watch movies is going to go away? Of course not. Do we all want to watch movies in our house moving forward? Of course we don't. We want to go do some cool stuff. But apparently it's not going to be in the same format that we have been doing things. That industry is reeling and they're figuring that out right now. Over the next 10 years, it's going to be figured out. So we got to make sure that our doors are open for those innovations. Education. Remember we talked earlier about Innovation District? There may be a component here. I thought the concept that Kevin was talking about the vertical school was interesting. It's taking something that's not paying tax, it's putting it on a smaller land footprint. Who knows what that looks like? Maybe there is a partnership that could be struck with your school district to figure out, maybe there's a portion of this mix that could be about job training, or anything that's innovation related. That could be pretty dynamic. Clearly open spaces, you've heard a lot of that before. These are probably not open spaces at the scale that the Parks Department typically works at. They're probably smaller than that, is my guess. Or maybe the way that it engages nature that's already around it could become more intriguing, with bike trails and walking trails, and maybe there's an environmental overlay that goes over that so that you get written up in the Wall Street Journal for that kind of an approach, stranger things have happened. But getting that kind of airplay is important. That's personally why I think your Green Centerpiece program is so important. And then it says civil, but civic and cultural. That's, I don't know where you all are at in your own facilities. Obviously, your city hall is fantastic, but there may be some public components that make sense here. I don't know. Sometimes I see remarkable places that are community centers that get done that are heavily used, but they're just floating. There's no context for them. Maybe there's a facility like that as part of the plan that could plug in. So I'm just going to show you a couple districts now, then we can talk, or some redevelopment districts as case studies. They basically are divided into two, and I'll tell you, there aren't many in the country because of how hard this is. There are not many successful mall redevelopments. There just aren't. A lot of people talk about it, but even the ones that we heard about today, they're not done. Are they going to be successful 20 years from now? Only time will tell. There's good plans, and there's a lot of good plans out there, but there are not a lot of actual viable comparative developments that have been done, especially for the thousands of malls that are dead in our country today. They're just, there's a handful. But they generally follow along mixed-use entertainment based districts and mixed-use employment districts. Those are the two zones. So BELMAR is one that's talked about a lot. I've been through it. It's a nice development. It was a failed mall in the 90s. It was redeveloped to be basically a mixed-use district. And you see an aerial on the right versus what it was like before retrofit. And it used to be 800,000 feet. It's now about the same amount of use, but it's different types of uses. It's set up on a street grid. It has housing. It has restaurants. It has employment. There are a lot of creative office users there, like architects, groups like that value the quality of the place. MIZNER Park is an oldie but a goodie down in Boca Raton. It actually was an outdoor mall back in the day, but in the 90s it got repurposed into a mixed-use facility that has housing and gathering spaces and small shops. It's been successful for a long time. Santana Row is an interesting development up in San Jose. You can't see on the left, I couldn't find an aerial when it was the mall, but it used to be kind of a big strip center type mall. and it got redeveloped into, once again, kind of a village format that has office, it has, you know, all the kind of streetscape performance-based uses that are in it. You see some imagery of that. And by the way, Mehrdad mentioned the owner of some of these places in California, Caruso, David Caruso. He's an attorney by education, has done some really amazing things. I don't know how his projects sometimes pencil. The amount of money that he puts into the public realm is second to none. And having trolleys and things, these are huge investments. I think he can do it because he comes from an incredibly well-heeled background. And some of this, it seems like it's almost a hobby at times. But if you were to get someone like that as a partner, fantastic. You can accomplish just about anything. So who your partner is everything. I happen to work on this up in Milwaukee, Bayshore. This is, you can see it was a big strip center. It got infilled. The strip center, the kind of vertical L piece actually was indoor because they get real cold temperatures up there. And now it has a range of office and restaurants and other uses that are in there as well. So those are the kind of mixed use and entertainment areas. The other type that you typically see is when it converts into employment. So you see in Scottsdale, there's actually a couple. Here there was a partnership with the university down there and a private developer that delivered over 1 million square feet, as I recall, of office space on the site. This is basically a redevelopment of the site. The whole building was torn down, the site was redeveloped. They put some big cool tent fixtures in there because, you know, Scottsdale has super high sun heat. And then they had that amenity feature, that visual feature, and then put office buildings around it with some restaurants. And ASU is in there. They have an innovation center. They put some housing in, you can see in the plan on the bottom right.
The other university.
What's that?
The other university.
The other university, yeah. Horton Plaza in San Diego it got tons of awards. A guy named John Jurdy designed it. If you were in, as I used to be, in regional retail design, you couldn't get better than Horton Plaza. That was the big deal. Everyone talked about it when it was done. And it's just remarkable that place failed because when the mall went away, people stopped going there. It was multi-level. It was kind of San Diego's version of the Galleria. So they have kept some of the form of that and then have added a whole bunch of different types of uses within the building and reclad it. So it's a little bit like a bigger version of what you saw Terrence present earlier. And then the Galleria Corporate Center, also in Scottsdale. This is a case, you hear a lot of, whether it's Amazon or Google or some of these other places, well, they will come in and take the building. And because it's one of the largest building types that's outside of industrial, that also has a good location, they'll say this is a great place for a fulfillment center or a data center, but basically a warehouse for people or a warehouse for goods. And I would say that that's probably not the best use of this location, in my opinion. But you can see that they've done that. They've made essentially a big data center, as I recall. They have good companies in there, that are internet-based. And then the Moonshot factory in Mountain View, you can see they kept the building, but this is where Google X landed. And now, as a use, fantastic, but the building itself is, it's kind of a dead zone on the outside of it. The use is fantastic. So the question is, if we can find a user like this, how can we add on to that with other things outside that takes advantage of that employment so it's not just a big industrial building, which is not industrial, but you get the idea. So finally, the process that we're recommending to you all is obviously a robust visioning effort that is primarily focused, and I heard earlier a lot of conversation from Terrence about we need 50 or 60 neighborhood community meetings. That's a different mall down there. It's rooted into its neighborhood. This really doesn't have a neighborhood. This is a commercial real estate investment that's gone bad. So it's how do you retool that investment in a way that meets everyone's objectives. And so we were not assuming there were 50 public meetings and all that. There can be, But we weren't assuming that. We were assuming a fairly efficient process, because at the end of the day, all we're really doing is trying to ramp up the owners to come in partnership with you and give them some ideas that gets that process going. Because inevitably, when they start having discussions with end users, those are new ideas that are going to be coming in. So we're just trying to kickstart the process, essentially, if that makes sense. So there's visioning with workshops that goes with that, focused on the property owners. There's then planning that develops the plan. And then, very importantly, there's marketing collateral. One thing, I don't know if you noticed, I certainly noticed, that, I mean, it was nice that there was that one video that Mehrdad showed, but there weren't a lot of incredible amounts of imagery that you would expect to see in a presentation to a city council about something that a group has done. The power of imagery is palpable. And especially if you're trying to get someone's interest to come invest. You know, to have some marketing collateral that goes with the visioning effort, you wind up with a package that you can take out to market and have discussions with the property owner and the mall owner, so that they can use as well to generate interest and get that process going, if that makes sense. So this is how we have devised it presently. We're always open to your suggestions, but.
I'll follow up on that as well. So just to give council some background of where we are, just having talked with the mall, the different mall owners. So there are three property owners at play right now. So there is Q Wong, who owns the Sears building. They also own Macy's. And so I can't remember the name of their new company. They've renamed their company with the Texas Secretary of State. But then you have Dillard's, and then you have ICA, which is Mr. Bushman, who owns the mall proper, as well as JCPenney. So you don't have, you saw pictures of other malls where you had a million different owners. You don't have that situation, so we're better, but we still have disjointed ownership. And so what you've seen, what we've seen over the last couple of years is a frustration between the different owners about what can I do, because they do have an REA. We've not been able to get a copy of that. I believe they're keeping it confidential right now. I believe they will share it once we start this master planning process. But my understanding from just representation is that it may be, they may be able to terminate it in 2026, so that might be a good time. This is a perfect time for that. The other things that have moved is that ICA seems to be interested in either finding another equity partner or potentially selling. So there's that change. Dillard's also had been an outlier where they had not been able to get Dillard's to sign off on an REA or changes to the REA. Dillard's has recently come to the table and said they are interested in an adaptive reuse of some sort. And then they have investors as well that are interested in talking about potentially purchasing more of the mall. So there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of interest. And all of the property owners now are saying, as long as you're not regulating me, we are willing to come to the table and we're willing to, you know, discuss what this master plan would be. So our recommendation, and it's coming to council, not this next meeting, but the following meeting, is a contract with Paris to basically do the master plan for the mall. And it's, you know, for lack of a better word, it's herding cats. It's just making sure all the property owners are moving in the same direction. I told Mr. Bushman's representative on the phone, I said, we're gonna herd the cats, and he laughed. He goes, I guess I'm a cat. And I said, well, you're the big Tom cat, if that makes you feel. So anyway, that's our recommendation. I'll let you guys ask any questions, obviously, but that's where we're moving forward with it. And I think it is important to have, in a master planning process, someone like Paris who has experience with development, so he can speak developer language, but also has that urban planning background. So we obviously want to make sure that we have a urban design out there as well. That was all I wanted to add.
I have a question. So Paris, you mentioned early in your presentation, I believe that what you would recommend would actually be not just the mall itself, but going beyond that. So in my understanding that the scope of what we're talking about doing right now is just for the mall piece?
No, there's two aspects to it. In the original visioning, it goes to the main streets that bind the district around the mall, not just the mall property.
Okay.
But then getting specifically, then we do zoom in on the mall property itself, but it's in the context of the larger vision.
Okay, so it's everything that kind of touches that ring between the ring and the arterial streets surrounding.
That's right, except I think on the south side, as I recall, it goes down to 121.
Okay. Which is off the map here, right?
Yeah, it's off the map here. Yeah.
Okay.
Council?
Does that include Costco? Is that all,
Yeah.
is part of that too?
Mhm, yes.
Okay.
Now, you already have your Southern Gateway plan, you know, that you all have worked on previously. There's a lot of good ideas in that. So we're trying to learn from the good ideas that have already happened and incorporate some of those too. So it should be a document that can combine with that, so that you have kind of a larger area of the city around both sides of 35 that you can, you know, you can be positioning.
I like the plan. I like the fact that you're gonna get, all these groups together and I guess kind of get their vision, because that may be.
Yeah.
That'll be the difficult part, to kind of get them, you know, all rowing in the same direction. But from there, I like the part where you said about actually getting something visual that they can see that will help maybe push that process, move their imagination and get this thing where we need to be.
Well, you know, we heard earlier a lot of conversation about how difficult this is, and that's true. But really, when you boil it down, outside of the legalities of the REA, which is really kind of the difficult part, this is master planning, it's master development, it's lot sales, and it's some vertical development. It's master development. There's probably only 3 or 4 companies in the country that can do this, or have a lot of experience doing this, because there's just not a lot of that. But the good news here is there is so much emphasis on North Texas. Internationally, nationally, there's so much emphasis that the kinds of uses that we're talking about that theoretically could go in, that I just went through, there's so much capital available to do any one of those that it just needs a plan to be able to support that investment. So I feel super optimistic that there's going to be change pretty quickly, as long as the players involved get along and play. And to me, the best way to get people to get along is to give them a collective goal, which is the vision.
Paris, I've only got a couple of comments to add to this. I'm super excited about getting a little more granular plan and you know, getting that down. The reason I'm worried about some of the newer models that are coming online, this concept of a neighborhood distribution hub, the concepts of the dark stores where it's a 24/7 grocery, but all it does is have people coming in and out of it for deliveries. I'm seeing that pop up in a lot of places, and it's just awful for quality of life in the neighborhoods. So I'm excited that we can drill down. What I'd be hopeful of in this planning, and I think we've got part of it, is if we can connect those corporate campuses down there on 121 and get some linkage, whether that's, I don't know, let's get creative and find an autonomous vehicle that we can carve a lane out and dedicate. And then, you know, my dream would be to have some sort of pedestrian capability or over 35 that gets us over to the rail station, because that puts us in that 15-minute window.
You're right.
So those would be, that would be my dream if we can figure out how to connect those two nodes into this, because
Okay.
that starts bringing in that corporate headquarters and brings more value to those properties.
Yep.
But those
Totally
are my
agree.
thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like this whole zone is fully developed, and there's suburban retrofit basically that needs to go on. So it's, where do you put the pin down? I mean, you know, you can keep going, but I think a good place to put the pin down is, like you say, something that's on the outside of walkability to the center. Because if everyone here does their job properly, this will continue to be a destination.
Right.
To drive to walk to bike to, and to talk about, you know, to want to live near, to want to work near. So it shouldn't be a passive use that just goes away. You know, similar to what you're describing with essentially the industrialization of retail into, you know, that's why the industrial market is so amazing right now, because it has a huge new user, which is called retail.
Right.
But yeah, I'm totally with you there.
Okay. Anything else on this one? All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the speakers today. Great material. Lots to chew on and think about, and I think you've gotten at least council's impression and where they want to be.
I do. The only thing I was gonna add is, we have lots of food left over, so if anyone wants to take it home.
Yeah, you could bathe in the amount of refried beans that are back there, I'm just saying.
Please take it home. Anyone and everyone, grab some.
So my understanding is what we have left is just a quick recap. We're not even gonna do that today?
We're gonna do that tomorrow.
Okay. What I've been asked as far as the recap is that we will get a recap list from staff, and it should be 80, 90, maybe 100% of what we had, but if council has any feedback to give on that, to please do that independent of the meeting, offline, or to speak to staff specifically about it. Because we were going back into items that we've already discussed, so that creates kind of a feedback loop that we don't want to recreate. Other than that, are we,
That's it.
all right, well, it is 3:24 and we are adjourned.